edition of Orange Literature Festival organized by SGR Knowledge Foundation in association with GH Raisoni University, powered by Raisoni Group of Institutions. A platform that celebrates wisdom, experiences, narratives, and notions from all walks of life. Having said that, it's thrilling to be here today with all of you present here. I am Nishika Multani, delighted to be the anchor for today's session, Women Writing on Role of Women in Mythology, by Ms. Nandini Murli, Ms. Shivani Singh, Ms. Anuja Chandramouli, and in conversation with Dr. Shakti Sharma. Dr. Nandini Murli ma'am is a person with diverse professional interests and engagements. She is an author, columnist, independent researcher in Indic studies, certified life coach, mental health promotion and suicide prevention activist, and a communications and gender and diversity professional. She compiled, translated, and edited the world's first signature edition of Bhagavad Gita. Her areas of professional interest include LGBTQIA+ issues, mental health, resilience and well-being, trauma literacy and education, suicide prevention and post-prevention interventions for survivors of suicide loss, sexual and reproductive health rights, gender, masculinities, and gender-based violence. She has developed a set of 12 life skill modules for LGBTQIA+ youth and affirmative approaches to counseling LGBTQIA+ clients. A resource manual for counselors. Her lived experience of suicide loss inspired her to establish SPEAK, an initiative of MS Cheramuthu Trust and Research Foundation, Madurai, to change conversations on suicide and promote mental health. An ardent advocate of building and fostering resilience, she and Kate Kiesel, US-based trauma therapists, have launched Bounce Forward, a cross-cultural coalition led by individuals with lived experience that works towards a radical global change in healing of trauma and fostering of resilience. Passionate about wildlife photography, she likes nothing better than wandering through the forest with her camera. Eager to share her love for the wild with young people, she initiated Voices of the Wild, a group of Madurai-based school children who discover nature and conservation through wildlife photography. Ms. Shivani Singh is a novelist who writes historical fiction. Her first novel, Raja is Dead, was published by HarperCollins in India and romantic. Secret of Siripur and Lonely Gods was published by Hashtags. Nalanda, published this year by Amaryllis, will also be available in Hindi and Marathi. Ms. Anuja Chandramouli is a best-selling author and a New Age Indian classicist, widely regarded as one of the finest writers in mythology, historical fiction, and fantasy. She followed up her highly acclaimed debut novel, Arjuna, Saga of Pandava Warrior Prince, which was named as one of the top 5 sellers in the Indian writing category of the year 2012 by Amazon India, with Kamadeva, the god of desire, Shakti, the divine feminine, Yama's lieutenant and its sequel, Yama's lieutenant and the stone witch. Her articles, short stories, and book reviews appeared in various publications like the New Indian Express, The Hindu, Scroll.in, and Femina. Some of her other books are Kartikeya, the Destroyer's Son, Prithviraj Chauhan, the Emperor of Hearts, Padmavati, the Burning Queen, Ganga, the Constant Goddess, and Muhammad bin Tughlaq, Tale of a Tyrant. Mohini the Enchantress is her latest work of mythological fiction and winner of prestigious Popular Choice Author Award. Her books are also available as audiobooks and have been translated into Hindi. An accomplished TEDx speaker and storyteller, Anuja ma'am regularly conducts workshops on creative writing, mythology, and empowerment in schools and colleges across the country. Her Mahabharata and Ramayana with Anuja storytelling series is now available on YouTube. She is a trained Bharatanatyam dancer. This mother of 2 little girls lives in Sivakasi, Tamil Nadu. It's an honor to have you with us, Dr. Nandini Murli, Ms. Shivani Singh, Ms. Anuja Chandramouli, and this gets even more delightful as we have Dr. Shakti Sharma, who will be in conversation with them as the moderator. Dr. Shakti Sharma is a doctor in food and nutrition and has qualified UGC. She received her master's degree with gold medal in food and nutrition from Rani Durgavati University, Jabalpur. She subsequently completed her internship from AIMS New Delhi and Badram Hospital in Goa. Dr. Shakti Sharma is an academician and a holistic clinical nutritionist specializing in weight management and sports nutrition for young athletes. She holds a teaching experience for over 12 years in reputed undergraduate and postgraduate institutes of knowledge. She is a certified diabetic educator and is successfully running a diet clinic, nutrition and youth since more than 5 years. She is an impressive public speaker on health and wellness and regularly conducts awareness sessions for corporate, various government organizations, and NGOs. She regularly contributes in print and digital media related to diet, health, and wellness. Her passion turned into a profession and has profoundly contributed to the book for upcoming home scientists, nutritionists, and food scientists. I once again welcome you all. Now, my dear audience, you are about to experience a conversation between two very dynamic individuals. So, without skipping a moment, I would humbly invite Dr. Shakti Sharma to lead us.
Thank you so much. I'm audible clearly? Yeah. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, and you have a very beautiful voice. I would like to acknowledge you for that. A very good evening and good afternoon to all of you. Since it's a post-lunch session, I know it becomes a little difficult to raise the morale. Can we have a round of applause for all our panelists today? Ms. Nandini Purvi, Gauri ma'am, and Shivani Singh ma'am. Thank you so much for being with us. As you know, we'll be talking about women in mythology. And these are the authors who are writing on women who were in mythology. When you talk about women, I think we talk about the beauty and the elegance the women carries. But women are more beyond that. It is the power, the calmness, the divinity. And today I'm really blessed to be among such women who have all the qualities. And we'll be talking about how we can uncode the women we had in our mythology. To begin with, can I have first question to Nandini ma'am? Who is your favorite mythological women character? I think somebody who doesn't simper and wait for her boyfriend to come in all Shingar, but who actually admires the beauty within.
I love this question, Shakti. I think I have a very special interest in women in literature because my PhD is in gender studies, and I think my favorite character, especially from Indic mythology, women characters, I find that it differs depending on which stage of my life I am in. So currently, if you were to ask me, my favorite character is Kunti from the Mahabharata. I just love her extraordinary grace, her resilience, and equanimity. And nothing in her life went as it should be. But I know this grace under pressure, extraordinary dignity, and strength of character. And what really, something which I really resonate with is her faith in the Supreme. You know, at one point she tells Sri Krishna, give me more and more of difficulties so that in thought, word, and deed, I would ever be steadfast on you. So that Sharanagati, that unconditional surrender to the divine, you know, that my life is in your hands, that sort of resonates a lot with me.
I think with this answer, we are setting up the stage and the essence of today's discussion. We talk about women empowerment, but today we will come to know about women who were empowered and maybe we have lost the legacy somewhere. I think my next question is to Anuja ma'am. Why you wanted to reimagine women in mythology?
Thanks, Dr. Shakti. I more than reinterpret, I think I wanted to reclaim the stories of these women because I think recently we see this narrative of victimhood when it comes to women. We read all these sob stories, and I'm not saying that every story isn't valid, but I also get impatient when we insist on casting women in a particular mold. And I think mythology at its heart is very empowering for women. So whether it's Shakti or Ganga or Mohini, I think there's they're so inspiring and relevant even today. And I'll give you just one example about why I chose to do what I did. If you take Ganga, I think Ganga is a very complicated, beautiful character, but either you worship her as Ma Ganga and you reduce her to the role of a mother, or you have a taming of the shrew narrative. I hate it, by the way. Of all Shakespeare's plays, my least favorite is Taming of the Shrew, and we have that for Ganga. Or we keep talking about how she was wild and tempestuous, and Shiva held her in his locks, and somehow the act of subjugating a woman is celebrated as the epitome of the masculine ideal. But I don't think it works that way. I don't think anyone can hold Ganga anywhere at all against her will, which is why I felt that story had to be cast in another light. It had to be a story of mutual respect between equals, not one of subjugation, where she's held trapped in the destroyer's locks. I just can't accept narratives like that, which is why I feel we should reclaim the story from its original source material.
I really like the essence, ma'am. And ma'am has a powerful, fearful voice when she says that no woman can be held. You cannot hold her in anything because she has that power. So moving ahead, I think if the audience has any questions, the panel is open. But what I feel is that all we know about mythological women or historical women is through the movies we see. If you talk about which women you know now, I think we know Padmavati a lot. Maybe I know Jodha Akbar a lot because I saw her in the movies. So I think my question to Shivani Singh ma'am would be, do you think that the way women are being portrayed from the mythology, is it correct, or you think the ideology is not being portrayed in the contemporary world?
So let's talk about Padmavat. I think it first started off as Padmini, and then it became Padmavat because there was a lot of controversy around it. I want to throw it to the. Is it okay to
Yeah,
throw
please.
the audience? How many of you love the movie? You can raise your hands.
The movie Padmavati.
Padmavati. How many of you have seen it? I'm sure everybody's seen it. So, how many of you liked it? Okay. How many of you didn't like it? Some people didn't like it. Why didn't you like it? I asked you why you didn't like it. Can you? You have to speak loudly. Or can you give him the mic, please?
No, I can. See, it's not about me totally not liking it, but I feel so there were some aspects those were not portrayed. I mean, those were fictional. I didn't thought that the way the Kunti was shown in that way because of that because of that stature or like that he was. So I think so some things were
Missing.
Yeah.
You felt that some things were fictional.
I think during the time when the movie was released also it was under controversy because people belonging to that region didn't comprehend to the way it was portrayed. I think ma'am comes from the same background, the Rajputana, so ma'am can comment best on that.
I can speak with a little bit of maybe authority here because I come from the same clan, which my mother is a royal family from the Kachava clan, which is from the Jaipur lineage. So I can say with authority that it was, and that was, I think, one of the major outrages which happened. I'm sorry if I can speak.
Yes.
So if there was a lot of outrage over this because it was not depicting facts, and it was first of all obvious from the trailer because this objectification of the woman. A Rajput queen is not a dancing queen. She was a symbol of authority. She was a ruler. She's not somebody who will dance in public like that. So from the trailer, from the woman, it's a beautiful dance sequence. But to make a Rajput queen do that, there was a lot of outrage against it. But that was not my major problem with Padmavat. You see, there is a complete misdepiction of tax. And I want to clear the air about what Johar is, because Johar is looked upon as some kind of suicide. It is looked upon as some kind of suicide, or it is looked upon as some kind of sati. In the film, also, they've shown Padmini as committing sati, which is absolutely wrong. Johar is not sati. One of the most important aspects of Johar, which is not shown anywhere, you will not get it anywhere except maybe original documents and stories or folklore from Rajasthan, is Johar used to happen with Shaka. How many of you heard of Shaka? Nobody's heard. I don't think anybody in the country has heard. Nobody's heard about Shaka. Johar, Shaka would happen together. The women would die first. It was the men who actually committed suicide. So what used to happen was, there used to be this huge fire where all the women would burn themselves. First, the men would be alive, and they would then smear themselves with the ashes of the dead women, their daughters, their wives, their mothers. They would put a tulsi leaf on their tongue. Tulsi leaf is put on the tongue of corpses when they go for the last journey to the cremation pyre. And they would wear orange. The Kesaria Bana wears orange, which is the color of renunciation. That I give up the world now because I have nothing to lose. And then and some of them would have, sons who were 3 or 4 years old. They would strap them on their backs, and they would go for a last charge where not a single man would survive. So when the invaders would come, they would see a completely demolished. It's just not women who were demolished or destroyed. It was the entire culture. It was a culture in which both men and women, for both of them, the honor of the woman was more sacred than the life of a man. And it was not something of victimhood. It was a thing of pride. It was a thing of arrogance. There was no victimhood about it. I shouldn't speak too much of it.
It's something really we should look into the history again. Ma'am has opened a new chapter for us. I come back to Anuja ma'am, who has always been writing and reinventing history. So, what is your take? Were women in mythology kept at home and heart, or they had some saying in the community? They took decisions. As we're still struggling with the same women empowerment, what was the role of women?
No, again, see, I feel that at no point in history have all women experienced the same fate. All women are not the same. Now, if you take Shakti, there are a million faces to her. That's true for every woman, We are, see, just because I have 2 daughters doesn't mean I'm only a mom. Just because I've written 11 books doesn't mean I'm only an author. So you can go on and on like that, In every stage in history, you have victims and you have strong, powerful women. Nandini here spoke about Kunti, and she's such a fierce matriarch. What a proud, fierce, strong woman she must have been to deal with widowhood, to look after her 5 sons and make sure they literally went into the viper's pit. That was, the Kuru political lineup out there, and they came out of it. They went through a lot of difficult times, but they came out stronger, and she was the backbone of the Pandavas, in my opinion. So you have her there, and we spoke about Padmavati again. And again, I would say that when it comes to, I tend not to question or judge the choices made by women throughout history. It's the same for Johar. If a woman chooses to give up her life for various reasons, it's her call. It's not a decision that's easily made. So I respect a woman's choice. I respect a woman's agency. And with me, when we spoke about my issue with Padma, for me it has always been the lack of balance when Bollywood portrays these stories. History is infinitely complicated, and you take Padmavati's story. I hate when it's shown in shades of black and white. Everything which this side did was right. Everything which this side did was wrong. It's not how it was. Alauddin Khalji, in a lot of ways, he was a tyrant, but he did do a lot that was good also. He was a strong ruler, and he did offer a choice to all the Rajput kingdoms he besieged and destroyed. They were given the option to surrender, and he wanted to, solidify the union by marrying, one of the royal women. And we also have to talk about Rajput pride, and we have to talk about the infighting among the various clans. It's not just the Rajputs. In throughout Indian history, we talk about how conquerors divided and ruled India. We have to acknowledge that we didn't need the conquerors for that. Division among the various parts of India is an issue we deal with today. It's an issue that has plagued this country throughout history. So when you're talking about what happened with Padmavati, you have to acknowledge that the Rajputs were, the Rajput kings, it wasn't only Ratan Singh, a lot of Rajput kings were betrayed from within. You know, it happened. It was the same with Mohammed of Gori, with Prithviraj Chauhan, it happened. He was betrayed
I
not
have to correct you here. There's a lot of yes. I think this is a lot of misreading. These are popular stories which we have been taught. These are historical narratives which we have given, which is not true. I'm sorry. A lot about the infighting amongst the Rajputs. These are narratives which have been built up over time, and about marriages to royal families. That is also, a lot of it is not fact. Like I come from Mansing's clan. So my elders believe that there is absolutely no the Kachaba clan, which is my mother's clan. There is absolutely no Islamization. So there is this common narrative that we became people know. We were staunch Hindu, and if for many of them even deny that it happened, it is denied. A lot of historical facts about infighting among the Rajputs, and Alauddin Khilji was not trying to. He was like a normal invader who would come to boot and plunder. You know, that kind of romanticization is also a narrative which has been built up. Infighting amongst Rajput kingdoms is built up. This whole thing that Jaichand was a traitor was built up. He was a great king. There is a lot of discussion of narratives which we are trying through Rajput history and historians to, to reconnect and re-establish. There was a lot of unity amongst them, and this whole thing about Mansingh marrying his family daughters and stuff like that, it is believed amongst us. A, didn't happen, there's no proof about it. Or B, was I think a maid called Harkabai. So you know, people at those days, that is what my clan members believe. They wouldn't have given their daughter. They would have given a concubine's daughter, or maybe some maid, who was passed on as a princess. So it is denied. A lot of what you're saying is being denied.
Yeah, I think it's always said that history is written by the winners.
Yes.
Who wins, he writes the history.
This is an example of that.
Okay. So I think I can put this question to Nandini ma'am now. Do you really feel there are pitfalls in when we reimagine women in mythology?
Yes, of course. So I'll just set a little context to this. We've heard of the words Itihasa and Purana. How do we, nobody in India, at least for a very, very long time, until recently, when we listened, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, we listened to it. You know, the reading came much later. I remember when I was growing up, I listened to stories from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata being narrated. Usually, Ramayana and Mahabharata, they're known as the Itihasa. In Sanskrit, Itihasa. Itihasa. Oh, it's like this. Oh, is it like this? There is that sense of wonder. Purana, if you etymologically, if you look at that word, Pura api navam. It's old and yet it's new. So, most of us never read the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. We grow up listening to it, told and retold. And who tells us it's an Aptavachana? Someone whose perspectives are, are very in-depth. Someone who's very wise. And the Purana and the Itihasa were never meant as moral stories for us to interpret, for us to, to analyze. They were meant to be very embodied experiences. By embodied experiences, it's not coming from a purely cognitive plane. You had to experience it, you had to feel it, you had to embody it. It had to be, a very, very visceral experience. They were supposed to offer you a mirror to yourself and make you ask yourself this question: in doing what I'm doing, what am I really doing? Who am I? Why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? They were meant to evoke such responses. So I think we somehow seem to have lost sight of that, you know. It's just a mirror. And even when we read any literature, when we engage with any kind of writing or a painting or any work of art, it's the multiple subjectivities, you know. What does it evoke for me? I have people telling me, oh, we're going to read your book so that we learn more about you. I really tell them, no, you read my book to learn more about yourself. It just shows a mirror. So I think when we, for instance, when we listen to, say, stories from the Mahabharata or Ramayana, Kunti, I resonate a lot with Kunti. For so many various reasons, I'm not going into it now. When I listen to Kunti's story, what happens within me? You know, I think we need to get in touch with that inner space. For me, these stories are used as vehicles for inner transformation. They hold that it enables us to look at ourselves with compassion and curiosity. You know, I look at all the characters in the Mahabharata, for instance, as inner archetypes. You have the Pandavas, they're the Daivic archetypes. Modern psychology speaks of it as the heroes, or what you call it, the positive aspects. And the Kauravas, they represent the Asuric or the shadow aspects. You know, shadow psychology is a huge thing in modern psychology, and every Pandava character has the opposite polarity also. So within me, so where within me do I embody the, if it's Kunti, if I'm looking at Kunti as an archetype, where within me am I carrying that Kunti energy? So therefore, can I look within myself? Can I sit with myself? Shravanam, I listen, then Mananam, I use them as stories for self-reflection, and then it is Nididhyasanam. I sort of see, what is the potential for transformation. I somehow feel that we sort of lost sight of this, and it causes me immense pain and anguish when I look at the interpretations and misinterpretations, especially using incompatible frames of reference and lenses. You know, I think a favorite rhetoric is, oh, this patriarchal misogyny. I'm a hardcore feminist, as hardcore as it gets. But then when we use incompatible frames of reference to look at something which happened so many years back, and you know, it just doesn't fit. So I think this whole thing of viewing the Itihasa and Purana as a mirror for ourselves, I think that is the essence, and perhaps that's why they were written not for interpretation and misinterpretation. It might sound very radical, it might sound very politically incorrect also, but I very strongly feel this is where it is actually meant to be, and it's been buried in the debris of the passage of time and years, and of course colonization. I think colonization, as you, Shivani, rightly put it, the layers of misinterpretation and distortion of facts. I think colonialization has done enormous damage to the very, very dharmic traditions and history.
I resonated so much with what you said, and especially the last part, so I can probably say it in continuity to what you said. That when you were speaking, we have this saying, na, ki Dadi Ma ki kahaniyan. This entire tradition, I think, is a vestige of the lost tradition of Shrutis and Smritis, because our knowledge systems were never written down. Because, when you write, you can write lines. But when it is an experience, the oral tradition, the Shrutis and the Smritis were oral traditions, which was passed from consciousness to consciousness. It was a collective consciousness which was passing and transmitting down its history and its knowledge, to the succeeding generations. When you write something, you can write fiction. They say history is fiction. I mean, people ask me that if you write history, why is it fiction and why is it not non-fiction? I said history is fiction. Most of it is. We have talked about, how it is. Narratives are built out of history, for political and sociological purposes. So I totally resonated with this thing about, when the act of writing started. That is again a colonial kind of construct that, oh, the letters, the alphabet, and learning. As if learning began when we started writing.
In the beginning, there was the word.
In the beginning, there was the word, and so, the act of the library and the paper, the whole romanticization of the act of writing was actually a romanticization of, writing untruths also. Because if you notice, though and that is why we have survived as a civilization. We are still the oldest extant civilization in the world. Because our oral traditions, the collective consciousness cannot be eliminated and deleted and wiped out like that. But what happens is when you start writing, when you start chronicling, you see there are certain civilizations which focus on recording. They will record. Even today, like even in Rajput history, I think that is where a lot of misinterpretation is coming from. And that is why it's very easy to build these narratives against Rajputs, is because though the king would make inscriptions, so that is where some of the history comes from. But most of the history which we get from Rajput history is from chroniclers like Farishta or Al-Banuni, or they are Islamic sources. Even the Chishtis, or the Persian sources, because and it is a fact that the people who are very good in recording and very good chroniclers were also very good at creating false narratives. So we have been, in a way, we have had to suffer that. Our history has been suppressed, but it has not been able to be deleted. We survived. We survived because we have a strong oral tradition.
Definitely. I love what you said about the oral tradition, the transmission from consciousness to consciousness. I think it takes it to an entirely different plane. Yeah, thank you for that.
Since today's discussion is about women in the mythology, I just want to ask one question before I open for the group discussion to come up. When we talk about Vedic women, there was no word like Abla. We don't see Abla Nadi word over there. Women was considered Aditi, means she is not dependent on anyone. And so what is your opinion about the Vedic feminism, which was women was considered as nature, to the Western feminism? Do you think the feminism word which we are using now, do we think the mythological world also we had this word of feminism?
I have strong opinions on this. So, about Vedic feminism and about Western feminism, I think there are two in stark contrast. I would safely say, and if people want to take me up on this, it's controversial, but I will maintain that a lot of Western depiction of womanhood is the sexualization and objectification of womanhood, which is not present, which is not inherent to our culture. And so there is a unidimensional, she is looked upon it as somebody who should be youthful and somebody who should be sexy. And I think that explains why when a man becomes extremely rich, there is no concept of companionhood or the wife, or like we have the concept of a consort. The woman is then replaced with the younger, more youthful models. And if you see the way cosmetic surgery exploded, it started from the West and it exploded from the West, it's because a woman doesn't seem to have any other identity. Besides, and it is done in very, very subtle manners. That's a completely different topic by itself. But I think a Vedic woman, we have to remember two things. It's not that she is not sexualized. So we do not have this saint and slut syndrome. That either you are a saint, either you are a Madonna-like figure, or you are a slut who is a completely sexualized object. There is no binary over here. When you look at Shakti and the 64 principles of Shakti, from the Ogren to the Soumya, there are shades in between. So she can be a sexualized object as well. When you look at the Khajuraho and you look at the sexualized woman, you cannot find a woman as sensual as, let's say, a woman depicted in stone in Khajuraho. That aspect is there. In Amarapali was the Nagarvadhu of Vaishali. She was an extremely respected woman. She was, in a way, a prostitute. So that also was there, but that was not the only role, gender role that a woman played. There were lots and lots of shades. She could be anything. I mean, it depended on her constitution and her temperament, which takes her to the Vedic time. No, I don't think there is any other. I'm sure that I don't want to generalize, but there was no rule set in stone that the only role for a woman is to be is marriage and children. Then she could choose another life if she wanted. The whole concept of Vidushi is the wise woman. We had 27 rishikas. We just didn't have rishis, we had rishikas. So there was, in fact, women were exhorted into, again, it was her temperament and constitution. If a woman's temperament is for childbearing and for to lead a householder's life, then the four ashrams are there. But if a woman chose to totally, take another path and go only towards study, that is also there. We have women in public life. We've had writers and scribes. So the whole thing is that a woman in Vedic tradition, and that is continuing till now. I mean, we are talking about the West, where women started getting writing, voting rights in the 20th century, 19th century, 18th century.
Yeah, even driving is not allowed.
Yes, in some countries. So this whole concept of Western feminism, I think it is very important for Indians to understand the rights of women from their own context and not borrow it from the West. Because it makes sense over there, where a woman is a sexualized object, where the culture is different. For them, feminism, right to equal pay and equality is a Western feminism thing. Why are you importing a concept in a culture where women are, considered Tripura Sundari and she's worshipped as a goddess? Why would you, think a little bit, understand your own history, your own tradition, and you're looking at tradition, when you talk about even men. Do you know who Umakant is? Who is Umakant? How many people know? Umakant is Shiv. Who is Lakshmikant? Lakshmikant is Vishnu. Which culture the man takes the name of woman? I'm talking about Shiv and Vishnu over here. Before every name, Shri Vivek, Shri Vinod, Shri. What is Shri? Shri is the feminine principle. She's the great mother principle, the Lakshmi principle. So we are talking about a culture which was where of the sacred feminine. So the whole concept of Western feminism is anachronistic here and completely unnecessary and irrelevant. We have to understand our own roots before we go. We shouldn't go there.
No, I agree with Shivani, what she's saying. But the thing I would like to add is that what I've noticed, if you're either a student of history, mythology, or just a student, you will notice that it keeps changing. Our notion of what is acceptable and what isn't. Just to give an example, now if we take our Puranic lore, women who were venerated tended to be supremely devoted to their husbands, whether it was Arundhati or Sita or Kannadi. These were women who were devoted to their husbands and they were deified for it because they put their husbands' interests ahead of their own. But today, that wouldn't be glorified. Today, the feminists would work themselves into a rage if that idea of womanhood alone is venerated. Now, I'm a classical dancer and I'll give an example from dance. In those days, the Devdasis were topless. They danced with their breasts, exposed. They would either paint their breasts or adorn it with pearls or something. That was considered perfectly decent for you to dance in a temple with your breasts exposed, but you weren't allowed to lift your leg and show Nadraja, the Shivan pose, the classic pose with your leg lifted. That was considered vulgar for a woman to raise her leg. Whereas today, if I were to dance, forget a temple, if I were to dance topless on a stage, that's acceptable in a strip club or for a cabaret dancer, but for a classical dancer to show her breasts, It would, you'll be slapped with a court case, or you'll be driven out of the country, or you'll be burnt at the stake. But today, we lift up our legs very comfortably, and there's a pose called the Uddha Tandava pose, where you lift up your leg and hold it in your right hand. That's a Nataraja pose. We do it to show off that, hey, that flexible, we're that strong, we can do it. So, that's not considered vulgar today. Just a small thing, but it keeps changing. Whether it's history or mythology, what is acceptable, what isn't, keeps on changing. Which is why I will always say nothing is set in stone. Nothing is set in stone. So let's not accept any one version as the only acceptable version. If something strikes us as wrong, if something feels questionable, I think we shouldn't be afraid to rewrite that version, to retell that version. Because, in the end, we have to, like Nandini said, everything is an experience. You have to explore your own truth for yourself, and you have to have that integrity when you go about approaching this material and reshaping it if you feel the need arises.
Very beautifully said. I also resonate with what Shivani said about, I think, mindlessly importing Western feminism principles and transplanting it in a very completely alien culture. But that said, I think, again, it's sort of resonating a lot with what you said about, I think, ours is a dharmic tradition. And I think those principles, I think one central principle is the principle of plurality. There is There is no restrictive binary, or there is no restrictive either or. So I think that principle of plurality, I think, is something we need to keep in mind. And also the other thing is that you're right about what you said about about the renovation of the feminine principle. And I think in the success of modern patriarchal societies, Western societies, in fact, the feminine principle has been effectively banished and silenced. And I think probably if those of us who've read Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, wherein he essentially talks about that exiling of the feminine principle and the kind of damage it is inflicting on society. But I think so. I think probably we need to sort of position a very robust, resilient, Indic feminism rooted in.
That's a nice, catchy word. That's a really catchy word. We just found a nice terminology which we can take in Indic feminism.
Indic feminism rooted in very dharmic principles. I feel when you decontextualize, when you bleach the context, when you whitewash the context, I think we're in for trouble. In for trouble in the sense of confusion, and this is, I think we end up becoming oppressed and identifying with the oppressor. The oppressor's values, the oppressor's ethos, the oppressor's worldview, all sounds so very tempting and so very seductive. And I think we are entrapped.
Just to add a little bit to what she said, I'll admit that when it comes to dharmic and Vedic notions of feminism, it is very, very sound. But I also want to add that over the centuries, it has been misused, because once we started setting these things down, once we moved on from the oral tradition, partly because a bit of Occidental bias creeped in, and partly because for the longest time, I think mythology was controlled by one caste alone, and therefore the narrative was changed, and therefore it has been used as a tool of oppression and exploitation, not just for women, but for other castes as well. We have to acknowledge that today's India still suffers from the evils of caste system, that for women, a lot of rights have been denied. We can't pretend otherwise, and therefore, which is why I claim it is very, very important when we feel that there's an element of bias or prejudice, or if there is, if the material is being used as a tool of oppression, it has to be reclaimed, it has to be rewritten, it has to be reinterpreted.
Absolutely.
I have a few words on that.
Yeah, definitely. Sure.
And then you too.
Yeah.
You too. Though I agree with what Anuja says and principle, what we of course now understand as Brahminical patriarchy. I'm going to address the elephant in the room over here. So yes, I'm not saying that Brahminical patriarchy does not exist, and I'm not saying that caste system did not exist, and I'm not saying that oppression of other castes did not exist, because of course examples will be shown. And the thing is that it is not so much as shown as flouted these days. And there is a narrative which has been created around the so-called Brahmanical patriarchy and oppression of the other castes and caste systems. Remember, caste is also not a word which is indigenous to us. The word caste really is also a colonial construct. If we want to go back to the history of it, the first categorization of castes happened in the 1930s or the 40s by the Britishers, who went village to village and started making lists of certain castes, which is to say we didn't have castes at that time. We had what we call jatis. So jatis and varnas. So तुम्हारा क्या है? And people didn't even know what they were. So they would say, अच्छा क्या है क्या है? So there was this very broad, superficial, Occidental understanding. See, even racism is not indigenous to us. The Varna Vyavastha was not hierarchy. The Varna Vyavastha was not a vertical and a lateral kind of a division of upper and lower and superior. Everybody had, from the Shudra to the Vaishya, they all had a place in society. The Shudras are the ones who built the temples. How beautiful! You think if they were an oppressed class, we would have built temples like that? They are the ones who were, the Ayurveds and the engineers were Shudras. You think they would have done that if they were being tortured and killed by Brahminical patriarchy and things like that? And even the Vaishyas, we were the biggest contributors of GDP at that time. The kind of prosperity we had would not have happened without a complete synthesis and harmony in the Varna Vyavastha is an extremely sophisticated and a refined way of administration, which has been misconstrued deliberately, it has been demonized. And certain narratives has been built to destroy it. The reason this narrative has been built was because that was the only construct which survived. And the colonial imperialism could not destroy it, and still has not been able to destroy it. So certain narratives were built, fault lines were created to break us up, and they succeeded. But we survived, and we should continue to do so.
Completely resonate with what you said, Shivani. And I think for me, it's the decolonization. And for me, my own decolonization has been extremely painful. It's been a very inward journey. And I found that I was so colonized, the white person's ideology, the white person's history, and so much of the oppression has been internalized, and I think that also colored my own gaze. It was the invader's gaze, and acknowledging it was
It's been an unlearning process of indoctrination, which has been internalized.
Yeah, and I think just as we're talking of an Indic feminism, I think it's time we talked of a very robust Indic studies. Very dharmic. And dharmic is just not Vedic. Dharmic is the bhumi on which we stand. And it's asking ourselves that very fundamental everyday question in doing what I'm doing, what am I really doing? It's being responsible for my actions. If that is not dharmic living, then what is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are running short of time now, but with this discussion, it should never end. We can just take two questions if there are any from the audience. Anyone has a question, or shall we conclude the session? Yeah. So do you need a mic, sir? Yes, sir, please.
Yes. Yeah, okay, I'll come there.
No, sir.
Hello. My question is to you. Actually, it's not a question, it's just a reflection. In the beginning of your lecture, you said that women should have a freedom whether she wants to go sati or commit zohar and all. Having accepted that, but there is another dimension to it. Like women's consciousness and identity of the self is by and large shaped by the narrative given by the patriarchy. So much of importance given to the sexual purity, which prompt you to commit zohar. I think that is an angle should be also looked up. The Gayatri Shivak, she uses the term like hijacking of consciousness, and there is something called Stockholm syndrome, where your consciousness is hijacked, and you speak the same language that has enslaved you. You speak the language of the patriarchy, and in a woman, unconsciously, in a way, unconsciously, women become an agency to support their own subversion. So that is just a reflection I had. And there is a narrative, there is a power and knowledge that is explored by Foucault, who says that the narratives are given by the power structure, patriarchy, and we subaltern, I mean, women and all of us, they speak the same language. I think that is also one of the angles that we should look up. And my reflection on your lecture, we should study not only to get informed, but to get transformed. That is just a comment.
Very clear. Very well said. Thank you so much for the
Thanks so much for your question. I just want to clarify first and foremost, I don't really condone the practice of either Johar or Sati, and I'm against the glorification of either, because let's face it, too often women burn for the sake of a man's pride. And that's something I will never find acceptable. I was just clarifying that, when you're a queen or a princess, you do have a brain and you have enough power to exercise it for yourself. Okay? So even if it's a patriarchal narrative, and whether a woman chooses to buy or not buy into it, it's still her call. So, she has, I like to think that women have brains which they can use to think for themselves. So whatever, there are highly traditional women, and I have no reason to look down on them or sneer on their beliefs. I try not to do that. Whichever side of the divide I find a person on, I tend to sit on the fence most of the time. I'm willing to keep an open mind and listen to everything. And I just clarified, I do not really condone women burning for whatever reason. Okay, so yes, but you are right. This whole business of sexual purity, as you called it, that's again men treating women as possessions, where they decide that a woman's chastity is tied to his notion of honor, his ego. I really don't agree with that. I think that's led to a lot of repression. I think it's caused a lot of problems in a land where it originally wasn't like that. We keep forgetting that the Kama Sutra was written in India. We were that involved, enlightened people. In temples, we have in Khajuraho, Konarak, we see such evolved ideas of sex and sexuality and desire. Desire was never demonized. It was never a chi-chi poo-poo type thing. So I don't know why we became so ridiculously puritanical and fixated on weird notions of purity. So I really hope that we can change those narratives and reclaim it.
Thank you so much. And this note, we end today's panel discussion. Thank you to all the panelists for their wonderful presence at the stage. And thanks to the audience also. We sign off now. Over to you.
That was indeed an insightful and an interesting session. I would like to thank Dr. Nandini Murli, Ms. Shivani Singh, Ms. Anuja Chandramoli, and Dr. Shakti Sharma for joining us today. We wish we get to hear you again and be equally enlightened as we are today. And for my audience, I hope that you all are taking an hope and enriched version of yourself after listening to this conversation, just as I will. Thank you for joining us today. Until then, I'm Mishka Mandani signing off. Thank you.
Vision Beyond.